Jeorge, and I am the founder and executive director of an organization called the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership. Do you all know what digital inclusion means? Digital inclusion, one of the most important elements of digital inclusion is to have all of you here. Because we live in a society, right? We live in a society with different people, different people of different cultures, people with different customs, but we all somehow are carrying a phone, right? You have every single one of you has a phone on their hands. Most people. But, so we can communicate, right? But if you don't have it in a way that I can talk to you, that means we're not fully included either, right? You can be included in one part, but not in a wider community. So for me, digital inclusion is making sure that you are here, that you have all of that, but we can actually communicate. We can learn from each other. We can support each other, right? We can do whatever we want. That if you want to talk to me, you can go on your phone and say, "Hi, Sonia, can you help me with this?" Or something else. Or let's do business together. Whatever it might be. So, our organization very much believes in the importance of digital inclusion. Digital inclusion from a gender perspective, making sure that all women and girls are fully included, regardless of where they are, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what caste they are from, what race, ethnicity, what language they speak. So that means we need to think about all of those issues whenever we think about inclusion, right? Because if I'm only speaking in English on the internet and you don't understand, you're not fully included. Or if you're only speaking in Hindu and I don't understand, I'm also not fully included. So inclusion is about all the dimensions, all the social, economic, and cultural dimensions that define who we are. And it means that policymakers, when we think about policy, that's why this session is about digital policy. When we think about policy, we need to think about all of those dimensions of who we are as human beings, right? Some of us define ourselves as a white woman that speaks Spanish. Other ones, a Muslim woman that speaks Hindu or another language. Everybody defines themselves differently, right? We need to make sure that inclusion also thinks about any kind of identity and way that we define ourselves as human beings. And we need to make sure that the policymakers that we work with understand that. Because if they don't, that means they're not working for us. And we voted for them to be there. So they need to work for us. They need to work for you and me and all of us. When that is not happening, then we need to advocate and call their attention that they're not doing their job. So what does it mean to do advocacy for gender-responsive laws? I'm going to talk about a couple of things, something that's called the digital gender gap, which I'm sure you heard about, but just to make sure we are all understanding what we're talking about. I'm going to share with you a couple of things from some research that we did in India, here in your country. I'm also going to talk to you about something that is called a policy framework that I hope will resonate with you because it's very much informed by women and girls, like many of you here in this room, and some men who are interested in learning how to do better work for inclusion. And then I'll share with you how some policymakers in Asia have addressed this question in a way that has been interesting. So, let's start with a fact. Women are disproportionately excluded from online. And you know that. In India alone, you know that only 30% of the women are online compared to 50% of the men. Depending on how you measure, that means either a 40% gender gap, digital gender gap, the gap of people that have been online, and I'll explain to you the difference between being counted as a user versus not. And if you do it the way that I actually like to do it, which is measuring women in relation to ourselves, we don't have to measure women against men. That is something that economists and others make that mistake all the time. So I just want you to be aware. There's two ways of measuring the digital gender gap. There's the way that is traditional, that measures men against men, as if men define the world. But we do it in a different way, which is women, based on how we women want to achieve. So if you look at the gender gap in India, instead of being 40%, which is how the world normally thinks about it, it would be more like 150, 200%, because the disparities here are very large. I already said a lot. You want to just do a quick translation? Did you understand everything?
Yes.
Any questions? Are you sure? So, with the statistics that are generally used, and I'll use those because you will see these in many places, so I don't want to get you confused with our way. But I do hope I confuse you so that you are curious to go search for them. So, South Asia has the largest, by far the largest gender gap in the world. Okay? But there's many reasons for that. But I just wanted to see that compared to other countries in the region. So, Bangladesh has 40%, 43%, India 40%, Indonesia 15%, and Pakistan 38%. Okay? If you compare to other parts of the world, some are much lower, there's a couple that are high, and there's actually some similarities between these countries. So Ethiopia has a 57% gap, and you also can see that Kenya also has a pretty large one. And if you think about it, there are specific elements of the socioeconomic dimensions that I mentioned to you that are actually very common about these countries. Okay? So I'm not going to tell you all of that now, but you can start thinking about that because I'm going to ask you about it in a bit. Now, we in our organization do a lot of research, and one of the things that we do is that we measure the policy progress or no progress that countries make when they determine policy, right? To change the reality. Because you have these gaps, you want them to do something about it, right? You can't just look at the numbers and sit down and go for coffee. That doesn't go for tea or whatever. That doesn't work. You have to take action. Taking action meaning doing things that will change the trajectory of what we see happening in society. And we want to change the trajectory of exclusion, the trajectory of inequality. We want to make sure that policymakers, including all of us, that demand from them, know what we can ask, and we want them to act to make sure that things happen. That's why the session is called Gender Responsive. You respond in a way that will bring about more equality. When we measure in our digital space how countries are doing, they're actually not doing very well at all. We measure countries in what we call the global majority, so countries that are low and middle income in the global south. I don't know how you're all familiar with the definitions. When it comes to broadband development, which is the infrastructure that allows us to be connected, countries are only about halfway there, meaning if there were students in school, they are failing. They're not even 50% of the 100% rate, right? So they're constantly failing when it comes to many things, including gender. But when it comes to gender specific, they're failing even more, okay? Which means that most countries, even though they know that the divides are there, they know the different dimensions of the divide, from access, connectivity, socioeconomic issues, literacy, affordability, they don't do enough. From my perspective, they're not really caring as much as they should about the people that vote for them. And much less, they carry a lot less for women and girls. And this is true across the world, sadly. This is not just in India, it's everywhere. So, specifically on India, again, these are data that actually is produced by the GSMA, which is the organization of the mobile operators. So in India, I already told you, there's a 40% gender gap on mobile internet. There's a 40% gender gap also on smart ownership. So only a small percentage of Indians have smartphones. But of those that have smartphones, there's also a big gap. So not only the gap is in access, but as you slice it down, the gap gets bigger, right? So if you think about it, it's even less women that have access to the internet through a smartphone, okay? And mobile ownership. I want to point this out because, not because it's an important number, because I want you to think about it. Mobile ownership usually measures just any kind of mobile phone. Are anyone here in the room, not to put anyone on the spot, anyone in the room has something that is not a smartphone? Most of you have smartphones. Well, because we in this room are actually very privileged, right? Compared to others in the world, we are the privileged here. The people that we want to contribute to and change their condition, their lives, not only, even when they have mobile ownership, so it appears that the gap is small, the truth is, because they don't have a smartphone, and the phones that they have, even though they own one, are very weak. They don't allow them to do the things that we want them to get done, right? So if women and men, poor women and men, rural populations, have mobile phones, but those phones do not allow for them to benefit from them or to have anything that is an opportunity that allows them to change their lives, to know about their rights, to have access to information, that is not good enough, okay? And you'll understand why I am telling you about this. Now, you know your country better than I. So, don't look at the slide yet. I want to ask you, what do you think is unique about this idea of the gender digital gap in your country compared to maybe others, or maybe within the country? You know, there's different states here. What do you think is unique about this gap in your country? How do you experience that? How does your family, the women and girls in your family, experience that? So I'll ask this in one way, so you cannot answer in general. I want the men to think, do all the women in your family have the same, first of all, a phone? Second, do they have the same quality of smartphone that you have? And third, do they have money to pay for the data that they need to use a smartphone? So, do they have a phone? Do they have the same smartphone quality that you have? And do they have money to pay for that phone to be connected? Okay, so, men, think about it. And for us, you see what I'm getting, right? Maybe all of us here are privileged, but is everyone in your community, in your household, as privileged as you are with your smartphone? And are all of your smartphones connected to the internet, or do you have to be on the Wi-Fi? Because if you always only use the smartphone when you are on Wi-Fi because it's free, that's one way of using and having access, right? But if you have Wi-Fi, but you also have data on your phone all the time, so you can have access whenever you want, however you need, that's a different kind of access. So let me stop for a moment. Is anyone not understanding? Was I clear?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. If you need translation, please ask your friends. So, who's going to volunteer to answer that question or to start answering the question? If you can. If you don't want to volunteer, write in a piece of paper and give it to someone. And we have to paper, I ask for paper and pens. If anyone needs paper, just let us know. Anyone wants to share? You're very shy. Are you very tired from lunch, or are you all very shy? We do have, oh, you just reminded me, we have the notebooks. So, you don't have to make it, make it in a way that others don't have to see, just write something down, and then share later. You don't have to answer now if you don't want to share right away. I'll pass it on. Yes, please. Thank you. Yes, okay. And then we'll collect the papers later. Please.
So, ma'am, I can tell you about my home, the story from my home. So if I see the generation of me and my brother, so we have the same quality of smartphone as we are studying, doing research or everything. But if I see that the generation of my father and mother, they don't. Because my father goes out for work or something, so he has a better quality of smartphone. But my mother don't, as she stays in home and she's a housewife. So I think there is a difference between the work we do. That makes a big difference in the phones we are using or the data we are using.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody more?
I want to add to that.
Yes.
To me, I have a session after this and the same thing will continue.
Okay.
But to me, I feel it's not so much to do with the kind of work, but the status which women enjoy in society. You know, we are already marginalized if you look at it. Maybe our class is different. Look at the people who are working, you know, maids, etc. Especially in the pandemic, we could really see, you know, they just have one phone and how it circulates in the family when children have to do lessons through, you know, internet and all. It was not available. So I think to me, the whole question of excess or not having excess has to do with the status of women enjoy in that society.
Okay. So.
Please. I think that's also the dependency. I can recharge my phone, my brother can recharge his phone. But if my mother wants to, she needs to depend on someone, on me, on my brother, on
Just
my
recharge?
father. Yes, sometimes.
All right. So we were talking about a generation, a patriarchal gender relations question. You're also talking about, you know, different issues in terms of status and ability to pay and whatnot. But what you're also talking about is skill and the ability, literacy skills. So all of these things are important. Very good. Please.
Most of the parents are equated with the sons and daughters. They don't operate on pictures of phones or send money. Most of the parents like this.
Okay. Yes, of course. Yes, go ahead. Closer.
The difference between the real and the physical regarding the phone and diabetic services. So I think all of these depend upon your education system. If you are educated and if you become self-sustainable, then you will be able to access all the things. Like in my community, I have 4 sisters and all are in civil services and they are doing greatly, they are doing better than me. And all they are using, when I am using my phone, they are using much earlier for them and they have the access to Wi-Fi and all the things. It's because of our parents who give them a better education. Like India, you say that if there is a daughter, then they will get to study in the government school, and if there is a boy, then he will get taught in a convent school. In our home, we from a Muslim community, being from a very small financial condition, all the children are getting equally and they are doing great people. So I don't think that daughter or the sister or the women are marginalized today. Thank you.
Okay. I'm glad that you have that experience with your sisters. That doesn't mean that everybody has, right? Sadly. Go ahead.
So, my father chooses to work with the money. He doesn't want, he can afford to buy it. He does not want to take the initiative of making any financial transactions. Here, the recharge that you're talking about is just if you have prepaid phone, so that was such to do with someone else. But he's choosing that. He's very much capable of doing all those things, but he's choosing. I just want to give one example, and I'm not talking about my family, I'm going to talk about the person who comes and helps me in cooking. She and her husband are both financially independent. Husband has his own shop. She's financially, she's not wanting. Like she works very well. She has good houses that she works in. Her skill is very much appreciated in our condominium. So she has enough, but she has money. Yet, and I think the quality of smartphones that both are using is similar. So Yet, whenever there is an issue with either one's phone, it's the man who gets the working phone. So if his phone is not working, he will take his wife's phone and she will not be accessible. So we can't afford that. On the other hand, if her phone is not working, she can't get her husband's phone. So that's where, gets more time on student. And they're educated, they're financially independent, but gender is silence.
Okay. So I just want to point out a few things that are important, and I hope you don't mind. I think that in many situations, the choice not to have is also a privilege. Okay? So I want you to think about that. In many cases, those who actually cannot have the choice, they would if they had the choice. But many times, that is a privilege in itself. And I just want you to think about that. The privilege of not having to or choosing not to, it's also important. It's perfectly fine. That's a choice. But it comes with that, which is really important. Yes. So just one or two more, and then we carry on.
So in the morning we were talking about digital gender norms, how gender norms, shape your experience of the digital space as well. And I'm from point of view an organization working with women, gender and sexual minorities.
Session. I really want to be here, but I have to be somewhere else.
So we have often seen that, even if there is access, like technology, if it comes to a household and there is a shared phone, for example, the gender norms will prevent the woman or the girl to access that phone. And this became very evident, especially during COVID, when school and college classes went online. And when there was a shared phone in the family, it was given to the brother to access his education, and the girl's education would take like a backseat. And this also happens because our digital needs and our experience of the digital space, especially when it comes to gender and sexual minorities and women, it's seen as something that is a luxury. It's something that we don't need. But here it has like a very intimate impact on her education and her very physical lived realities and needs. So just wanted to share that.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I hope everybody heard that. That's a really good point, and I'm really sorry I missed your session. I really wanted to be there. There's one more? Oh, here, and who else? Okay, start, and then we come here. Please. Just two more. Yeah, go ahead.
So actually I want to put a different point to it. So my parents both are educated and they have almost like proper education for examination and masters. So I think the gender gap, digital gender gap is seen not with the quality of the reports or anything, but I think it is mainly because of the understanding of use of smartphones. So like, because my father tends to do a job and he uses it daily, so he knows how the phone is used, especially in previous generations. But when it comes to mother, she has never used it with the phone. So the kind of role she does, so it is very lenient in this. So I think that's where it's generally.
Okay. Good. That's a very interesting perspective as well.
I want to say that no matter how highly qualified you are, sometimes in your family, if your parents don't allow you, especially for girls, they don't allow to have their own phones. Still in 2023, people have that thinking. So I also come from a family where 2-3 households of our family don't allow girls to have their own phones. Even after qualifying 10 SSC, even after qualifying intermediate or degree. And they say, you'll get a phone and you get married. And our brothers, after qualifying SSC, they will have a smartphone in their hands. So that discrimination is the same. Still it is continuing. So that thinking of people should change.
Yes. I totally agree with you. And I hope most of you do as well. So that means for us to change that, there's cultural things, there's social issues. There are a lot of things that actually policymakers, not just the ones who are in the high levels of government, but everyone involved in policy can have a role to play in changing these things, right? And we can do that. I always talk to people about what can we individually, how can we influence others to change those kinds of ways of doing things, right? And we're going to talk about some of them. That's what I told you that it's the policy framework. And all of us can do something about it. So let's get there. I want to point out a few things so I have to keep track of time. The comment, she's just leaving the room. The comment that colleague was making as well, I think is really important, which is the role of education in a lot of these decisions in Indian society. This is not just specific to India, it's also true in a couple of other countries in the region, but I think in India is more predominant, that a lot of things are very determined and highly correlated to education. So they can hear you. Can you? You can? Oh, sorry, okay, I'll start this way. It's getting cooler, the room, so that's good. So education is actually one of the key determinants in Indian society that is surprisingly very highly correlated with how decisions get made about ownership, about usage, about access, and many other aspects of how people can engage with technology. Even if the technology that we're talking about is just a smartphone. But then the same applies when you look at computers, when you look at businesses, etc. So technology, this is just one element of technology, but there's many other elements, right? So a couple of other things that I want to point out that our research showed, and by the way, our research is available on our website. You can see, download, use it. We make all the data available, so if there are researchers in the room, feel free to play with the data, do new analysis. Everything that we publish, that we do is open source, so feel free to use and make it useful to you and to your work. One of the things that we found in our research on these that we did around not just the cost of exclusion that I started talking about, but also meaningful connectivity, is that those women and girls that have the ability to then engage and to have a higher level of connectivity are 3 to 6 times more likely to do interesting things in their life with that access to technology. And this is really important because when we think about policy, right, and when you think about changing understandings of society, including those that can be culturally, socially, and economically very grounded, incorrectly, but very grounded, you have to think about ways to address that. And one way is to use research to back up some of your demands, right? Some of the things that you want to change. So if the research shows that women that have one kind of access can do certain things, but women that have a different kind of access can do 6 times more, from access to information, to developing businesses, to running, like you all are an example of, then it is the duty of policymakers to make that possible. Because then it means that you can contribute to the economy, you can contribute to the society, you can contribute to your community in a way that is much greater. Because your potential is so large that it should not be limited, right? That is why this is important to think about in the context of policy advocacy and demands, okay? I'll share these, so don't worry about it. I'll share with the team so they can send to you and to us. So, as we just saw, the problem isn't new, but here we are. Like I said, 2023, we have to be able to something about it, right? We absolutely have to. There's a couple of ways in which working in policy is very interesting. And I'll share just a few with you. One is, it's always good to have allies. Knowing who you want to influence and have allies. I just put a few quotes here. just so you see, because these are quotes from people that are considered famous in different contexts. Sometimes just having someone that is respected, famous, known, say something that helps you with your cause. That alone helps you carry through that message. So I always say this because sometimes people think, well, it's working with politicians, yes, but you know what? Politicians love saying that what they are doing, someone else important also agrees with that. That's one thing. So, if you have a cause, and I'm sure you all have, you want to think about policy change, identify who are your allies. Who's saying the same thing that you are saying, who is saying things that will back you up, and make sure that you use that to help you with your arguments. So that's something that is really important for us as we try to change things. As I said, when women are given access to the internet, they can do extraordinary things. Truly extraordinary things. We documented these in our research. I hope you can take a look at it. But in the end, when it comes to policy, it comes down to economics, numbers. No matter how we're talking about ethnographic research earlier with someone, and even if that is better, if you have a really good number, it will draw more attention. And I know that very well, and my team knows that very well. So, what we did 2.5 years ago, we decided we were going to document, not just say that there's a gap and we need to do things. We're going to tell politicians, this is what it costs your country, your economies, in your failure to do anything. Because you don't do X, this is how much it costs you. And we did very fancy econometric analysis because they love that. So I was like, okay, let's do it. We can do it. I'm also an economist. So we did a very fancy economic analysis. And now, the UN Secretary General, the presidents, they're all using the numbers that we published. Why? Look at that number. In 1 decade, the world lost $1 trillion. This is just in 75 countries of low and middle income, including India. And it is a big portion of that, as you know. $1 trillion from the failure to include women in digital development opportunities. So when politicians don't know what they need to do, everyone loses. Everyone. Businesses, economics, society, everyone loses. So when we get that big number on a report and went to the media, they all got very nervous. I know not everybody can do that. But that's the power of numbers. That's the power of quantitative research. But then, you add on top of it all of that quantitative research, the real stories of people like all of you here, like myself, my family, and then we give life to those numbers. This is something that DEF, the Digital Development Foundation, has done extremely well over the years, and other organizations that we partner with and we work with, because we see the power of when you do these things. And then you get the allies. Remember I told you about all the famous names, allies, that can influence the politicians? You get your allies to know the numbers too, so that they can tell the presidents, the ministers. Have you noticed these? What have you done about it? Let's think about that. If anything, not that it's always very good, technology has helped us spread misinformation, but also good information. And this is one good use of using really good advocacy, really good campaigning to make sure that the information is known. And those who are not acting are put to shame in a sense. We don't say that, but you know what I mean. Now, I told you about the 1 trillion. If we continue with doing nothing, we're going to lose another 525 billion just until the end of 2025, which is only 2 years from now. So it costs us all a lot. We cannot accept that, right? just simply cannot happen. So, we developed a simple framework to remind all of us, including all of you here, how to think about policy, how to think about influencing policy, and what are the dimensions of that influence that you can think about in your work. Not every single piece of these is going to resonate with all of you the same, but you can pick one thing or two, because all of us working together, we can make change happen. Remember? It's about collective responsibility, collective action. If we all work a little bit here, a little bit there together, we make progress. Okay? And in English, it works very well. React. You see something you don't like, you react. Okay? What does react means? You have to think about rights. You have to think about education. All different things that you all talked about here already in your experience. And please write on those pieces of paper, we'll bring them together later. Rights, education. So rights meaning human rights, the rights of women and girls in their societies. We talked about digital rights here since yesterday, since 2 days ago. Osama and others, and I'm sure in your session today, many people have been talking about rights. What are digital rights? Digital rights are part of our human rights. So think about that. And this then allows you to go into policy advocacy mode and address how each of these things get tackled, right, in different contexts. But rights, education, and when I talk about education, it's both literacy education, like the kind of education that some of you were talking about, to be able to plug a phone. That some mothers still ask their children to plug the phone to charge because they're not quite sure how to do it. Okay? So, education to feel comfortable, to feel confident about your capabilities, but also digital skills. Access, and when we talk about access, it's access to the internet, to meaningful connectivity, to affordable and meaningful, and we're going to talk about that just after. Content. If the content that is in different places around the internet is content that is not relevant to your daily lives, then it doesn't matter. If it's relevant but then it's done in your local languages, it's not going to be so useful either. So content is important not just in terms of the breadth of it, the relevancy, but also, and super, super important, language. Multilingualism is absolutely critical. As you probably all know, the internet is dominated by a couple of languages, and that's it. So by default, it's excluding many that don't speak those languages, right? And targets. I don't know if you know what targets are, but targets are very important for politicians and for policymakers, because that's how they are accountable, right? So in order for us to think about gender in policy making, one very important, one of the most successful, simple, not so simple, but simpler things we can do is to make sure that any kind of digital policy that a country has gender targets. So it's not just about to say that they want 80% of the population to have the internet, if then maybe they measure in one way that women are still outside, right? Of that measurement. No, it has to be a gender target. If there is a gap of 40%, one target that, just to be very precise, the government of the EU could have is to halve the gender gap. Let's halve the gender gap in 5 years. And then in 10 years, or even in 6 years, or maybe even in those same 5 years, it's eliminated. And every time development happens, it benefits everyone equally. That is clearly not happening. So having targets matter because policymakers, politicians, they care for targets. Because then they can tell when they go out on campaigning, which is happening, we reached the target. If there's nothing, there were no targets, there was no promise. So make sure that there are targets in your policy. Without targets, there's nothing. They are not accountable. They didn't promise anything. They didn't say they were going to achieve anything. And it could be that there's no way of measuring any promise that they have made. So have a precise number target. Okay? Either to reduce, to half, to eliminate, or to increase accountability, whatever. Now, why is all of this important? You already know, but I'm just going to repeat all of a couple of possibilities that allow and benefit women from all of these connectivity. Women are likely to participate in many parts of society much more actively, civically, and in other ways when they have access, and this is proven through research. They are more confident because they have access to information. They know what to do. They know how to help their families. If a child is sick, they know what to do because they can go and find out what they need to do. If a young woman wants to learn about her own health rights, she can go to the internet and find out that information. If a young boy or a transgender person wants to go and find out their rights in their country, when it comes to digital, they can go and find out. They can find out who are the companies that are more likely to hire people like them, either because of background. Many of you spoke about caste and ethnicity. All of those multitudes of our beings, we get information about it and we can act on it. Without, we can't. Skills, time, all these different things. Now, just quickly, just so you know, because we talked about meaningful connectivity, I don't know if you were all in the opening the other day. The reason why this term is important, I just want to put it out here so you are aware. This is important for the targets of policy making and all of these different things. We always talk about meaningful, affordable, meaningful connectivity. And that means obviously being able to pay, everybody being able to pay, not just some, right? But also having the right quality. This is why I was asking you the question, what kind of phone? Are the phones that your family members have, are they connected to the internet, or do you have to wait until there's a free Wi-Fi to be connected? See, these are all questions that are addressed in this concept of the quality of the connection that we need to be able to really enjoy what it means to be connected, to be a digital citizen. If you cannot have these things, you cannot exercise that citizenship because you cannot have access to the information, access to services, access to products, access to whatever you decide you want to have access to. Okay? Now, these are technical things, but important. So, having at least a smartphone, I don't know if you can see, so an appropriate device, the minimum should be a smartphone, 4G-like speeds, unlimited connection, meaning always available whenever you want. If you have a smartphone, then you can only connect once a day when you go on the Wi-Fi, the free Wi-Fi. That is not enough. What about if you have an emergency, an accident on the road, and then suddenly you have to call or check some information, and you see what I'm getting. And daily use however you want. Okay? If those conditions are not met, that means you have a poorer type of access as well. So policymakers need to make sure that spectrum is available, that smartphones are cheaper for everyone. The better smartphones are cheaper and available to everyone, not just some, not just the high-income people, everyone. That data plans are affordable, and that makes sense. You can buy whichever you need for your needs. All of those things are important. And they are just as important for women and for men, for rural populations, whoever you are. And why is that? Because we know our research and research from many other people around the world has proven time and time again that the barriers, some of the most important barriers to women's use of the internet is affordability, because women still make less money than men. In India, I think the income gap is still about 30 to 40%. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. The last data that I have. So that means that women have 30 to 40% less money to put into those things if they are allowed to spend their own money. So, affordability, the wage gaps, the device gaps. So if they don't have as much, they can also go afford the higher, more costly smartphones. Privacy and security is important. Many women choose not to go online. Not because of the cost, but because they're afraid of being abused, of being violated from being online, of being taken advantage of. So not knowing how to protect their data, if they are aware of it. There's all sorts of privacy and security issues that are very important. Literacy, knowing, having the knowledge, having the education, the experience with technology, and the cumulative effect, as we like to call, of all of these barriers of living in a society that is patriarchal, and this is not just about India, of course, it's around the world, a society that is constantly putting women and girls at a different, lesser condition by default. That is not acceptable. That's why policy can address all of these things. And if you understand how this plays out, you can do better. Why is meaningful connectivity important? I just want to share with you. In India, remember we're talking about 30% of Indian women are connected to the internet and 50% of men. Of those Indians that are connected to the internet, they are counted as having been on the internet at least once in the last 3 months. That's the definition. Okay? So if you've been to the internet, even if you don't have a device, if you went to a coffee shop and you used some friends or a brother had a computer or a phone, or you went to work and there you used, if you did that at least once in the last 3 months, you are counted as an internet user. That is why for us it was so important to define meaningful connectivity. And fortunately, we did so much work to advocate for that the United Nations adopted this definition. That our team developed, not just the affordability definition, but also the definition of meaningful connectivity, which not only includes all of the technical aspects that I mentioned to you, but now also includes digital skills. Which means that the member states of the United Nations signed on to that, including India. So now you can tell Indian government, if the policy doesn't say that you must have all of that, you can say, oh, but you told the United Nations that our policy is going to help us do that. So you have something, you have a lever to use in your advocacy, in your policy, in all of your work. Okay? So right now in India, this was actually data from 2021 we published last year. In India, only 7% of the population had meaningful connectivity. So there's already a lot of people in India without, but the truth is, the largest percentage of Indians that are counted as connected to the internet have what we call poor internet, basic poor internet. It is not meaningful. So I'm going to stop for a second, either for clarifications in translation, and I think you are trying to say something.
What year is this data?
2021. This is based actually, this data, and it's available, I'll show you where to find it. This data is based on nationally represented surveys that we did in the 9 countries, in part of the original starting research for the concept of meaningful connectivity. So we developed the concept, and then we did the research for some countries. As you can imagine, this is very expensive to do, 9 countries at that level. And this research was done both on the quantitative side, and then we also complemented it with very strong ethnographic and qualitative research to get the nuances, especially of the gender dimensions that play out in each of these countries, which are all very different, by the way. Every country has their own particularities. Yeah. So, just to give you an idea, when it comes to meaningful connectivity, in India, only 3% of women have meaningful connectivity. These are the numbers that no one likes to talk about, that I'm going to share with you because you need to know. 3% of women have meaningful connectivity, and only just about 10% of men. So of those that are connected, these are the ones that have connectivity, most don't have good enough connectivity. So a lot of work needs to be done. Okay? Now, all of this is important because without it, there's no meaningful use. You are limited in multiple ways of the opportunities that actually having this wonderful tool would provide. These are some quotes. I don't think, what is it? What is it? Okay. So let me go through quickly. I'm going to share these with you. These are quotes from women in different countries on how meaningful connectivity, when they were able to have real, true, meaningful connectivity, how that changed the way they could engage with technology and access. Okay? So we have lots of those in stories, and we wrote many different pieces to share how women felt when that happened. And it's very powerful, because it's really the voices of women and girls that tell you their realities. It is not even me talking to you. You'll have to go and read if you have a chance. So I already covered some of these. I'm just going to quickly give you some examples of what some countries did to address these on the the REACT framework. Remember REACT? So if whoever wants, what did Sonia tell us during she told us to react. What's react? Remember, rights, education, access, content, targets, okay? Remember that word. I need to react to something that is wrong. So react, okay? So, on rights, Malaysia, a country in your region that has done really tremendous work from a consumer perspective to implement digital rights in your country. Very much with a focus also on women. Okay? Because women in Malaysia were also, as consumers, not only not being protected, but they were not given the same opportunities as male consumers. Okay? And this is very important from a privacy perspective, because as in India, consumer advocates are actually very strong organizations. So Malaysian civil society worked with the consumers' advocates to be able to change their law on these issues. Education. In Bangladesh, they still have a long way to go, like India, but we work with the government of Bangladesh, and we've actually developed what is now in the process of being approved, their national broadband plan for the country, and it's the first time that the country will have a broadband strategy fully responsive to gender issues and with gender targets. So let's hope it gets approved. It's going through all the political reviews. But they're doing really interesting work. Colleagues in Bangladesh doing very interesting work. Philippines has done a lot of very interesting work. One of the things that they've done that has been very new and very innovative was subsidization of devices, because so many women in rural populations could not afford devices, and it was very important for them. So they actually subsidized devices to poor households and poor populations, and women specifically, poor or not, women that were not vendors to be able to pay their own. And they subsidize it through something that is called the Universal Service Fund, which you also have here in India, by the way. But I don't think it has done anything specifically on devices, but it has done something interesting. Oh, that's the next one, on content, that they used, in your country, used the Universal Service Fund to subsidize the development of specific activities on women's empowerment. It was a small project, but it was something to start with. And maybe that's something that you can take advantage to say, do more of it, right? Then replicate.
Yeah, I mean, typically the Universal Services Obligation Fund remains, and it's huge.
I know.
Huge in this country.
It's mostly in use, yeah.
It's mostly. So I think there has to be some effort at pushing the government to start using it for these purposes. It was supposed to be for these kind of things.
That's right. Yeah, so I don't know if you all heard, but there's a lot of funds, so the operators put money into these funds, and then the government is supposed to distribute the funds to projects for infrastructure, for gender equality, all sorts of different things in rural areas. The infrastructure piece is usually to bring infrastructure to rural areas, and most of it goes unused. And sometimes used in the ways that you don't want to think about. That's what happens in many countries. I don't know about India, but in many countries it is. And in Nepal too, I think it's really important, they also have gender targets in their country's broadband strategies, something that you can see them. And they also included specific initiatives with set aside resources for women's education and skills. So there are examples of many things that can happen. many things that you could engage with, and you could amend your governance, your policymakers. And when I talk about government, I talk about local, state, national, all the different layers of government, right? Different states, like here, you are this state is very special because the state has its own policy on digital development. Other states don't. I also work in Nigeria. Some states are really good about it. They decided, we're not going to wait for the federal government. Forget about that. They don't do anything. So they decide to do their own, and they have their own policy they're implementing. That is really special. You can do that. You can see who are your allies. Remember your allies in the government here, in your local, sub-regional governments, and get them interested. Just like the state here got interested and put a lot of resources. You can show that, right? It's not impossible. So let me stop and ask, did any of you wrote anything or no? If you didn't, that's okay. Did anyone write anything about the questions that I asked you? No, you will be shy. If you have anything, just put it in the pile and then we'll put together. You have something? Do you want to share? No? Okay, I don't want to force anyone. But, okay. So, yes? Can you give it a...
It's not about the questions because I wasn't there for that part of the session, but just wanted to share, maybe it's also important to unpack what meaningful access, or when we talk about meaningful connectivity, what is that meaningful, because sometimes there is 4G, there is a smartphone, there is broadband, but access is so conditional. Women and girls are having to explain at every point that this is when I need my phone, this is what I'll do with it. There is hardly any access at all. And if all of these patriarchal things that we navigate across online, offline spaces, if those start to be taken into account, then that 3% will fall further. Yeah. And another little thing is a lot of data is again still in the binary. So a lot of experiences along the spectrum, they just go missing.
That's right. Very good questions. Let me take 2 or 3 or any comments you want to share. There's one in the back, and then we'll come back to it. And can you, if you wrote anything on a piece of paper you want that can put together, can you do me a favor and just put them over there, or give someone else that you trust to put the paper there, and then we'll just read it through, okay? Go ahead.
So when you're talking about some person, is it across genders, or is it only for women, population, there is people think that?
That's your question?
Yeah, no, after that I have one question.
Okay, no, it's for everyone.
It's for everyone.
Yeah, gender is, there's different genders.
Yes.
And I'm a very true believer in that, so, it tends yeah, women and men tend to be the largest groups, but it's about any kind of gender identity.
So after that, so we see that there is 3.3% of women have access, which means that there will be around 4.7% would be the men's access.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
So when the total percentage of access in the entire population is 7%, and the women's percentage is around 3.3%.
Yeah.
Which means that there is only 4.7% even in men.
So it's 3.3% of the women, of the women that are connected, that are considered connected, only 3% of those have meaningful connectivity. So of those that already are connected, not of everybody. Okay? Do you understand? And of the men that are connected, about 10% have meaningful connectivity. So both men and women are poorly connected, but women are further poorly connected, even more. Is that clear? Okay. And on meaningful, what does meaningful mean? That's a very good question. It means a lot of things, and I think all of us have our own definition of that. One of the important things of having is that it's the threshold at which women and girls and others can do and make decisions however they want to do what's right for their lives. It is not me to say what is meaningful to her or to him. They have to decide, right? Whatever it is important. If I were to tell you, for me, I want to be able to always be connected because I want to have access to information. I want to know what's happening. I want to know if my daughters are calling me and need help, that I'm there for them. Or if they have an emergency and I need to look for information to answer, then it's there. I want to be able to connect my friends around the world. I want to do research. I want to, buy things. I don't have a business in that way, but I like to look at art. Sometimes I cannot look at art in India because I live in the United States. So I go on, sites to look what are the new things that artists and filmmakers are doing. All of that is only really possible with meaningful connectivity. If I want to watch a movie from a site here in India, from the US, if I don't have meaningful connectivity, or the other way around, you want to watch something from another country here, or we have to have enough. Those are basic things, right? So it's not just the basic communication, but it's everything else that we want to do with connectivity. But I would say what is meaningful to each of you will be different, right? But what we know, and we don't have time to go through all of that, but please take a look at our report. We actually asked people what that was. And we checked. And now we're doing the research again, and we're asking people also to compare their pre-COVID and post-COVID experiences as to what became important to them after COVID and during COVID. Because that changed a lot the way people started using connectivity as well. And so we asked these questions, and all the data and all the results are there. So take a look. If you don't, our website is just Global Digital Inclusion.
GPS signal lost.
You can go to that and just check all the reports. And like I said, in January, we're going to publish a new research report that looks at these at an update. And it includes research, some research from India as well. Qualitative research from India, not the quantitative, but qualitative, which is really important. So I think I answered all the questions. Anything else? Okay, so now, just to close, I have one question for all of you. So I have to keep this. Just one question for those who feel comfortable answering. It was a very short session, but is there one thing you have in mind after hearing today's conversation and discussion that you would like to do, and that you think you might have a moment, what we call a window of opportunity, to maybe do something about it? Right? Think about it and share if you can. If you can share, that's okay.
So after hearing all the discussions like you described very well, so I was thinking that what are the steps that we can curb this gender gap? In my point of view, I only see education as a source to curb all these things, because in India, people before investing in mobile phones and mobile internet, they would invest on the basic needs first. The basic needs are education, health, livelihood, self-sustainability. All the things are prior before to invest in the mobile things and internet also. Like before Jio was introduced in the country, it was very difficult to everybody to get recharge for the internet. Like recharge very costly. But after the introduction of Jio in the country, every mobile operator are giving most amount of discounts and all the things. So I was thinking that can you suggest what are the steps so that we can take in our family or in our society to close the gender gap?
Sure, I think that's good. Let's should we take 2 or 3? So, anything else? Anybody else would like to say something? So think about all the things: rights, education, access. You talked about education already. Good. So think about all of the different things, right? So some of you, I know that there were some of you here in the conference that that like to write blogs, write articles, write research, content about your own lived realities, about your lives, about the needs. That's really important. The more women and girls are writing about what they want, the more others are also going to hear. Just an example of content. Education, yes, the basic need. Education in the context of digital development takes on a different dimension. So it's beyond schooling education, but it's integrating the skills of using technology in basic education, but then beyond basic education, through workforce training, through university, through businesses. In some countries, for example, they use the University of Sonia and other things to train women entrepreneurs on how to become better at making business plans, dealing with accounting, things like that. There's many things that can be done. So yes, some may be considered basic needs for you, and I will consider rights basic needs. For me, all rights of people are, that's why they are called human rights. It's the foundation of our humanity, right? You have something.
No, I think you covered most of it there.
I'm sure.
Without my cap. But I just want to, like, a lot of points that have been discussed.
A lot of points that have been discussed here, I think they do hinge on an important element of affordability. Now, agency of women, whether they are homemakers, financial independence, they don't have their own money and they're dependent on whoever from the family. Agency, I think, a lot of data does indicate that it comes from the financial independence. Whether it's literacy, access to resources. So affordability of network, affordability of hardware, affordability of good connectivity. If that comes into the picture, I think the families probably might, be a little more comfortable with access and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And of course, those are all basic things when we think from a gender perspective, right? So I hope that listening to the few things that people share, that allow you to think about and imagining those possibilities, right? Because a lot of the examples that we heard are having to do with that agency, with power relations, and all of these other concepts that I didn't want to go into it today. But when we do a 1 week full workshop on all of these, all of that, I think it's very important. So please.
Yeah, so she spoke about financial independence. I would talk about financial literacy because in India, a lot of women, they work, they earn, but mostly the money is handled by the men in the house. And India is huge in digital transactions, if you know, phone pay, and there are a lot of other apps. On daily basis, even like small vendors, they have these online transactions. So if you can teach that to women, then I think that would be great because as you told, like continuous connectivity with the internet and everything is helps, right? So if you could add that point as well, that financial literacy for women, then that will make a huge difference, at least in India, is what I feel.
Yeah. That's a very good one. And you know that there's a lot of projects working on that probably, and it's very important. And it gives a whole new possibility to many women, and in many countries where financial inclusion has been done from a gender perspective, it has been very powerful, but it's not always that way because of this ownership issue and whatnot. Ownership remains a very complicated problem in many countries, but we have to close. Okay. So, well, thank you all. I hope this was a good glimpse of this issue for all of you.